Hey fermenters, Austin Durant here. Welcome to another episode of Fearless Fermenting FAQ, where we answer your most burning fermentation related questions. This week's episode answers the question, how do I know if it's safe to eat? As you'll see, fermentation is a force of nature, and therefore sometimes things can go wrong, sometimes things can look or smell funky. So we'll give you some guidelines on how to negotiate and navigate whether something that you fermented is safe to eat. First, a little bit about Fermenters Club. Our mission is to improve people's lives by teaching you why and how to ferment food, as well as to create communities that are connected through our guts. This is something I've been working on since 2011, and now we have quite a few different offerings. We've got a website with over 100 recipes, as well as tips on how to get started on your food fermentation journey. We've got online self-paced classes at our Fermenters Club Academy. We also have one-on-one coaching services, as well as private team building exercises and public workshops, which are all hands-on if you're here in Southern California. We've got a free newsletter, and of course you're watching our YouTube channel, so please remember to like, subscribe, and share this video if you are so inspired. And last year I wrote a book called Fearless Fermenting. It's a textbook meets cookbook all about food fermentation. You can get them on our website as well as on Amazon. All right, let's get into today's topic. Is it safe to eat? So generally speaking, and this is a quote from my book, Fearless Fermenting, in the annals of fermentation history, there's never been a documented case of someone dying from eating bad fermented vegetables. Now that said, the corollary to that is always to trust your senses. This is one of the bedrock concepts that I always talk about in workshops and everywhere, and that is that we are gifted with a complete set of senses, as little as 5 or as high as over 20, depending on what you're counting as a sense. So we have a full set of gear, so to speak, that helps us negotiate our environment, and we want to use that to our advantage when we are observing and examining things like fermented foods. So I always give this definition to start off of what fermentation is. It's a tried and true technique to transform and or preserve food by encouraging the growth of some type of good microorganism at the expense of what we call the bad microbes. And the reason I bring up this definition now is to show you that good and bad are really just different contexts. So, for example, when we're fermenting vegetables, we want to grow lactobacillus among other types of bacterial species, and we want to keep out ones such as molds and yeasts and that sort of thing. So yeasts and molds are not inherently bad, but in that context, it's not something that we want to create. So we'll see how that comes into play later. So generally speaking, when we're talking about vegetable fermentation and most other forms, we're creating some kind of acidic environment, and in the case of vegetables, we're adding a lot of salt, and that regulates which microbes show up to the party, so to speak. So both of those work to help keep what we consider opportunistic or pathogenic microbes. And again, these are just microbes that are in the wrong place at the wrong time. They have a role in nature, but we don't want them in our food. But again, by adding the right amount of salt and by the generation of acids that the microbes themselves create, it creates an environment that is generally safe. It's worth noting that most of the contamination that happens in fermentation is biological. Like I said, it's the wrong microbe in the wrong place at the wrong time. And it's also important to remember that fermentation is in fact a natural process. Sometimes Mother Nature likes to throw a curveball, so it's important to use our powers of observation to assess whether any specific dish is safe to eat. Again, we have powers of observation, so let's go through this. The first thing we want to do is check the appearance of a fermented food, a dish when we're done. Are there bright colors or spots or splotches or patches that shouldn't be there? And if that's true, then maybe that indicates that certain microbes have joined the party, so to speak. Also, give it a smell. Fermented foods may smell musty, funky, yeasty, sour, sweet, acidic, or floral. But the question is, do those odors belong in the thing that you're creating? And do they make you want to retch, or they make you want to vomit? And if that's the case, then that's a telltale sign to trust your senses and deal with that ferment, either by composting it, recycling it, or dumping it. Another thing we want to look at is the texture. Does the ferment that you're making have the right amount of moisture for what it is you're creating? What is the consistency of the liquid or the brine? If it's a brine-based ferment, is it viscous? Is it cloudy? Is it bubbly? Is there something that shouldn't be there, or is there something that should be there that's not, or something that's not that should be there? Is the dish mushy, raw, dried out? Has there been foam that forms? Or is there excessive carbonation in the case of beverages? Again, just observe it and check out what the texture is. And of course, the flavor is another telltale sign. So, is it the right amount of sourness, sweetness, bitterness, saltiness? Most ferments, as I've described, will become more sour as the microbes create these organic acids, because sour flavor is associated with acids. And the truth is that even if something is questionable, you can taste a little bit of it, at least by putting it in your mouth, and then decide at the last second, this is something that I want to swallow, or if not, you can always spit it out. It's not going to make you sick if you just put it in your mouth and decide you don't want it. So if something is on the extremes, whether it's extremely bitter or astringent or sour or otherwise unappetizing, spit it out and then just move on. So again, we have all these senses, look at them all, determine what the context of your specific ferment is, and make a call. So when ferments do go bad, something obvious will not look, smell, or taste right. That said, we are potentially engaging in something that's new or exotic. Don't override your senses if they're telling you, if they're screaming at you, no, don't put this in our body. Honor those senses. And in that case, you can toss it in the compost pile. You've generally created a bunch of a big set of microbes, and they're usually compatible with most compost piles. In fact, they'll probably appreciate the inoculation of microbes, even though you wouldn't want to put those microbes in your body. Or failing that, throw it in the garbage or dump it down the sink. Now, it's important to know that especially when we're fermenting vegetables, surface yeast and mold is in fact quite normal. So the part that's exposed to the air, if we're talking about a jar or a crock, generally air harbors yeast and molds, and so it's quite normal for some of them to coalesce and settle on the very top layer of the ferment. If that happens, don't throw everything out. Just make sure that you carefully wipe, scrape, or scoop that top layer off. And as long as the contents underneath, again, give it a small taste once you've cleaned off that top surface. If it tastes, in the right ballpark, then you're good to go. I like to say wipe, scrape, scoop off that top layer. Maybe even dig down an inch or half an inch, depending on how far that yeast penetrates. It usually just sticks to the surface, and then move on. Now, one exception to the mold rule is kombucha, and I'll show you some slides that have different pictures and kind of show you what yeast and mold look like on various different ferments. So like I said, if kombucha develops mold on the top of the SCOBY or on the surface, you do want to throw it away and start over with a fresh SCOBY. Make sure you clean and sanitize everything and start over. Yeast or mold that gets into kombucha is bad news. It can actually make you sick, whereas that's not true for the vegetable ferments. All right, so now let's play a little game called Keep or Toss. So these are pictures of various ferments that I've made over the years. and you can decide whether you want to keep them or toss them. So in this case, this is a jar of pickles. So what would you say, fermenters? Would you keep or toss this? I would say go ahead and keep it. So in this case, I just took a paper towel and a spoon, and I just wiped off that top layer. Again, that top layer was just harmless yeast that had coalesced. You can kind of see there on the top of the ferment. But as you see, I cleaned off that top layer. I stirred up the brine a little bit, and it was fine. The pickles were great. All right, next. We've got some sauerkraut that had, so I had a smaller jar that was sitting inside the crock here. You can kind of see that basically created a ring, and around that ring, the part that was exposed to the air, is a pretty substantial layer of mold had formed. And this is actually mold, because you can kind of see it's got greens and blacks, and just airborne yeast and mold. And it actually formed a pretty thick film. So, what do you say? Keep or toss? No, believe it or not, in this case, we also kept it. So, again, I wiped and scooped out that top layer. And in fact, the layer was pretty consistent. Like, it actually came off, it had developed a biofilm. So it was actually easy to remove. But again, do your best to get all of that stuff out. Wipe, scrape, scoop if necessary, and then still give it a taste. Give it a, smell the odor. Does it smell off? If it smells off, then go ahead and toss it. But in this case, it was just relegated to the top surface because I had used the weight to keep the vegetables under the brine, and all was fine under the brine. So we'll end up keeping this batch. All right, this is a 𝐓𝐡𝐚𝐧𝐤𝐬, which is a beverage that you basically make a brine. You submerge cut up beets into it and let that ferment for a few weeks. And again, this had gotten a little funky over a few week period. That is mostly pretty much all calm yeast. And you can see I have a little device in there that helps keep a little plastic retainer that keeps the vegetables submerged. So what do you say? Keep or toss? Keep. So again, wipe, scrape, scoop. Oftentimes, if you're using something like a fermentation weight, or in this case, a little plastic retainer, you can lift that out, and that will often remove most of that yeast. And then, like I said, wipe, scrape, scoop out that layer, give it a taste. If you like it, it's still good to go, then you're fine. Now we'll take a real life example here, a live example, I should say. This is a batch of white miso that I made last year, but I had forgotten that it was white miso, and I had in my mind thought, oh, this is red miso. So if you don't know the differences between the two, white miso is a shorter ferment. It should take about 6 to 8 weeks, whereas red miso can be anywhere from 6 months to 2 years. So I had basically let white miso, which should only be an 8-week ferment, go for over a year. So when I went to go harvest this, thinking it was red miso, I opened up the jar and I looked in there, and boy, is it a hot mess. So it was very alcoholic-y smelling. So that's another clue with certain ferments in the long process with when we're dealing with starches like koji, which is what's in miso. It can get over fermenty, and alcohol would be one of the byproducts. So not only was it alcoholic, and not in a pleasant way, it was like bathtub moonshine, completely out of control, not at all appetizing. So just the aroma set me off. Then I looked in there, and there were quite a few different splotches of various types of mold. This is dried out because this happened about a few months ago. So when I first opened it, it still had a lot more moisture. Now it's been dried out. And my hope was that at some point this would be edible, but I kept coming back, smelling it. I don't even want to taste it. And unfortunately, it's got the funkiness of miso. However, it's just a little too far gone. So I haven't had the heart to throw it out yet, but I really need to do that and then move on with that. So that was just user error. Again, like I said, I way over fermented something that should have only been about 8 weeks. Let it go over a year, and thus funky in a bad way of results. All right, let's look at our next keep or toss. So this is a kombucha SCOBY that actually one of our club members sent over. And as you can see, there are green, yellow splotches on top of the kombucha SCOBY. So what do you think, fermenters? Keep or toss? Definitely want to toss this. So just dump the whole thing. Again, if you've got a compost pile, it's perfectly fine. You're adding a lot of inoculated bacteria and yeasts. It should be fine for a compost pile, but not fine for you to drink or for you to continue fermenting. All right, next example. This is another club member sent in a picture saying, "Hey, is this bad? Is this mold?" This was a newly started batch of kombucha, and to my eye, when the new layer forms, the new SCOBY, usually it's fairly uniform. So my estimation, well, let's see, what do you guys think? Keep or toss this? Is this a normal growth, or is this something funky? My esteem was toss it. So the fact that it was that splotchy let me know that it was probably more like mold versus that SCOBY layer. That new SCOBY layer, every time I've seen it form, even in the first few days, it's very thin, but it's very uniform. So rather than take a chance, I advise this person to go ahead and toss it, start over, again with the fresh SCOBY. And our final keep or toss, this is a kombucha, actually it's a kombucha variation called Jun or June. And I had let this SCOBY go a long time between feeding. So what do you think? So it's just sitting in a shallow bowl right now, and something has formed there on the surface here. To me, I know what you guys think. This is another toss it. Because again, you don't really want to take a chance if you're not sure about whether something is mold on top of a kombucha SCOBY. Err on the side of tossing it out. And this was again due to neglect. Because I had a Jun SCOBY, which feeds on honey, I had let it go a few months in between, and I hadn't fed it, and inevitably it had developed mold. So hopefully that helps give you some confidence and some tools into how to observe and how to make the call on whether something is safe to eat or not. Again, just a reminder, check out all of our free resources at fermentersclub.com. And please remember to like this video and share it with a pal if you got something from it. And until next week, we will get to another episode. But go ahead and leave a comment, leave a scary story about a ferment that you've had, and we'll get back to you. Thanks again for watching, and we'll see you next time on Fearless Fermenting Fact Friday.